I'm Nat. I'm the head of community at an organisation called Exceptional Individuals. We support adults who are neurodivergent, so things like dyslexia, dyspraxia, autism, and ADHD, but also others like DLD, which we don't always talk about just because it's not as well known, but it's still something that kind of comes under alternative ways of processing and learning and seeing the world. And this is a subject which we actually are delivering today because of people in our community. Because a lot of people are saying, nah, you're always banging on about dyslexia. What about this one? And no one ever talks about it. And the reason why I hadn't done it before is, to be honest, I wasn't very knowledgeable in it. So I have spent the last several months, because it was quite a few months ago before when someone mentioned that we should deliver one, researching and getting up to speed on it. It's been a real fun one because there really isn't a great deal of research for adults. But in terms of how it develops, it's quite similar to dyslexia, if any of you attended our science of dyslexia. But obviously, we know roughly how it happens, but not the exact. So we can't say why some grey matter forms and other neurons and lots of interesting things. So at Exceptional Individuals, as well as supporting people, we also work with organisations delivering interactive workshops, educate people, link them up with talent which goes unmissed every day. A lot of us are exceptionally talented. And when I say us, I'm referring to myself as well, because I'm also neurodivergent, as well as 80% of our team. And I think that what makes us one of our unique selling points. We are experts by experience. So we live this day to day. And it's with these ways of knowing the struggles, the strengths that we try to pass on to individuals as well as organisations. So the question we're going to answer today is, do I have developmental language disorder? And we've got this image on the left. It's a bit of a complicated one, but all it is saying is that all the things to do with language and communication massively overlap. And it does fall under like neurodiversity, and autism is associated, but we are going to dive a bit more deeper. So do not worry about this because it is a bit intimidating. But when you Google developmental language disorder, it's like the only one that comes up. So in a nutshell, and this is just to get the bare basics out of the way, and then we're going to really break it down. A person with DLD, that's the abbreviation that we'll use mostly today, has difficulties with language. I know, what's special about that? Most neurodivergents are to do with language, but we'll go into what makes it special. It's also known as, or was known as, before they start to consolidate all the names, expressive receptive language disorder. Sounds fun. Specific language impairment, speech language impairment. So those names aren't used that much now. It's mainly DLD. But another thing which is quite interesting to know is that there's been a big debate on a lot of these. Is it a disorder? And not everyone agrees, but some people just think it's a learning difficulty. But ultimately, about how much it affects you, and also they wanted there to be some coherence, so some sort of thing that unifies them, and it's clearly to know they're part of the same family. It's a lifelong condition, which all neurodivergents are. Of course, you can learn coping mechanisms, you can learn to mask, you can kind of cover it up, but you've still got it. Approximately 1 in 14 have DLD. It commonly occurs with other diagnoses like ADHD, so it is not uncommon at all to have one and the other. Less people are diagnosed with it just solely on its own. Normally it's a co-occurring one. It's also hereditary. Now some of the common difficulties revolve around expressing your ideas, having conversations, following instructions, memory retention, just attention, and reading and writing. So these are where the brain can almost, but they might just struggle with the last bit. And there are other ones that we're going to break down today, but most of the points that we're going to be looking at will fall into one of these categories. So the first question I want to ask you, and I'm going to be asking a lot of questions, and these were taken from some of the self-assessments that people use to diagnose or have that initial conversation. And I have worded them in a way which is more to emphasize what it can be like for someone, though the questions might not be exactly the same. What substituting words do you use for commonly used words? So maybe there's something that you don't know what it's called, that thingamajig, stuff, I don't know, what's gonna call it? Like when you've got the word on the tip of your tongue, but you're not able to think of it straight away. So Sunjana says stuff or thingy. I use thingamajig a lot. Cool, thingamabob. Nice, April. Do love thingamabobs. And that's one of the classic things. The next one is, what related word do you substitute even when it doesn't mean the same thing? So is there ever a word which doesn't mean the same thing but you still use it? Like on here, for instance, we've got a picture of a burger and a wrap. So even though the wrap is not a burger, you still call it that. Or here we've got, you might say a couch instead of a chair. So they are different things. They might be related, but you call it the wrong word. Or the other example of beef and chicken, because the brain isn't quite connecting up the right words. I quite like this one. Please use the thongs when buying bread. I'm pretty certain that was in Chinatown though, not due to DLD, but still. Okay, we've got cushion and pillow. Yep, no, that's a classic one. Kids' names. Yep, always referring to kids in the wrong way. I often get genders mixed up a lot as well. So like I call people like he and she, even though that's not the gender that they go by. Sunjan says, yes, I do this, but can't think of an example. I know it's quite hard to think of an example. You know when you're doing it, but then thinking retrospectively can be very difficult to like retrieve that. So I'm going to assume a lot of you do have this, but might not necessarily be able to recall it. The next one is, what words do you often switch the sounds within around? So you are just not pronouncing the words correctly. The classic one is Peschetti to Peschetti. I mean, I can't even say it correctly, but I've always pronounced it wrong. April says, on Tuesday when my house manager was fixing my kitchen blinds, he asked me what he could find a tray. I was confused, but it turns out he meant a dustpan and brush. Yeah, great example. So we've also got Oprah and opera, specific and pacific, comfortable or comfortable, calvary to calvary. These are words which some of them mean completely different things, and yet we use them interchangeably, either because we get tongue-tied or the brain struggles with retrieving the right word. It's like, I know the difference between Pacific and Pacific, however, it's something I struggle with day to day. I also struggle with words like shoulder and soldier, like the fighting. Very different things, but can be very difficult. And those are just some of the words. So at the moment, a lot of people struggle with the ocean one and also with the cavalry one. But I don't know, would you use that in most day-to-day scenarios? Maybe not. When I go to Toby Calvary, possibly. A cracking roast. What is a made-up word you frequently use when the correct word can't be produced? Sometimes people with DLD will come up with their own words. It's not unusual to make words up. I try to think. What I normally do is I blur words together. So I'll take two, like maybe I'll do door and shut and do to shuck. Like I'll combine the words. What's it? Similar to those thingy type words. Yeah, there's a lot of words that we kind of use to fill it in. But there might be words that don't really mean anything to anyone, but are new to you. First half, one word, second or next. Yeah, kind of joining them together. I do appreciate it's quite difficult to come up with these words, so do keep in mind that you might not be able to. Sanjan says, I do use alternative words to explain myself so other people can work it out. Yeah, a lot of the time you can kind of work out roughly what you're trying to say, or you'll say it and in your brain it's completely normal English. Everyone would understand it, but to the outside world they're like, did you just make that word up? And Tina says, my son gets very frustrated as he can't find the words. He uses actions to help me find the words. And that's a form of communication, though we don't always recognise it as well. Do charades count? Yeah, absolutely, why not? So by the end of this, my son says, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. And I think that's because they might actually know, but having the vocabulary or they'll be able to retrieve that vocabulary when it is needed can be quite challenging. That's something which a lot of people with dyspraxia can struggle with as well, is having the information in their head, but not always being able to get it out when they need it. So the first one is fill in the blank. I need to turn on the to make a cup of tea. There is a missing word. Are you able to fill it in with ease? Okay, so yeah, Sunjan has interestingly put 2 here, and that is a good point. So yeah, most people put kettle. Great, yeah, it was kettle, and to a lot of us, kettle makes the most sense. It's also the word which is typically used within that phrase. I'll put the kettle on, but it doesn't. It's not necessarily the right answer. It could be put on the tap, or you could put on the hob, or anything. But it's a lot of the time people with developmental language and learning disorders can really struggle to like put the concept together. So what is the word which could go in there to what is the word that typically and most likely goes in there? Okay. So yeah, now we're getting into the quiz. So there's a few questions and they're very similar to these ones, but written in different formats. And I know while I was growing up, it was very difficult to understand these. So which one is correct? And for this, you need to look at your phone. So is it a blessing in the skies or a blessing in disguise? I feel like we're on the chaser at the moment. So pick one that is the correct one. Nice. So all of you got that right. A blessing in disguise. And maybe that was an easier one, but did any of you start like second guessing yourself? Like, you know the answer, but the second someone asks you on the spot and there's a time ticking, you start to second guess. And that can cause a lot of stress and anxiety. And unfortunately, there is a strong link between having these disorders to depression, anxiety, mental health. In the small studies that have been done on adults with DLD, it is shown that people have struggled with mental health. Now, again, that's whether that's because of the actual condition or diagnosis or because living in a society where everything's a little added harder, that's up to you. Jenny says, I know a lot of metaphors, but they get mixed up with each other. Yeah, there are so many that I think I know and I've been using for years, but aren't kind of the correct ones. Okay, 3 of 6. Which one is correct? Nip in the bud or nip in the butt? Ooh, yeah, it's nip in the bud. And I used to always think it was butt. I mean, they're very different things, but because they sound so similar and it's depending how you learn language. So, for instance, some people learn it by phonologics breaking it down and then rememory. Other people learn it by creating visual imagery in their heads. Other people might do it just by the shapes of the letter, or there's multiple ways. Uh, yeah, they're difficult. And once you kind of get it stuck in your brain, every time you remember something, you're normally remembering the memory. So the neural pathways are kind of like getting stronger. And if you, for instance, remember the wrong one, you're kind of building that up. So that's probably why, even though when you learn the correct answer, you're probably still going to make the similar mistakes, even though you've learned it. Rachel says, but who knows what nipping in the bud actually is? I don't know. Some of these phrases are an era of generation Pacific, which is why I don't know them. Yes, you are right, Sanjan, and I'm not saying if you do not know these, you have DLD. It's more about creating a sense of empathy of how it can be like. With a lot of people, it's far more what we would consider basic everyday knowledge that they can struggle to retrieve. This is more to create an empathy.
I was just sort of saying that, like, if you heard that and you didn't know what it meant, I can imagine why you might think it was nipping you in the butt, because who even knows what a literally nipping in the bud means anymore? And but like, so you might think, oh yeah, well, something might nip you in the butt. So it's almost like your brain will go to the most likely of those two things to try and make sense of it, perhaps.
Yeah, no, I think you're completely right because it does seem the most logical, basic knowledge. But as Sarah has says, cutting the flower at the bud so it stops growing. Well, that makes a lot of sense now that you've told me. But it does require you to have a certain set of information at the beginning. So you need to know what a bud is. You need to know about gardening. You need to, and then quite a few bits of information needs to come together in for order for you to correctly understand it. And that can kind of short wire the brain. I know a lot with dyspraxia, it's again giving enough time. Could you work it out? Absolutely. But if you're giving on the spot, you've got to pull information from several sections and they kind of like collide and then not much comes out. So unfortunately, a lot of people will assume that it's an intellectual disability when it doesn't have to be or is not, depending on the individual. Sometimes it's just about having the right amount of time to accumulate all these different areas together. Okay, 4 or 6. Which one is correct? Is it deep seated or deep seated? And Sunjan, you're completely correct that they do not make a lot of sense in current society. Okay, oh, so we had a mixture here, quite a few. Is it deep seated or deep seated? And yep, deep seated. And this is another one which, because they sound so similar, of course you can kind of get them confused and mixed up as you go along. I believe the origin of this one is that you sink in a seat and you're quite seated. But obviously the other one makes sense as well. So as you can see, I'm starting to do more and more difficult ones, and it's starting to muddle your brain when you start to realize that I don't understand what this means in this context and everyone else seems to be following along with it. It can be quite stressful. Yeah, and Richard says T's and D's are also very similar.
In sound, yeah.
Seeded makes way more sense. Absolutely. I mean, that would have been my initial one because, oh, deep, you put seeds in deep. But then if you know the context of what the person's referring to, you build up the understanding. And a lot of the time with like language processing and comprehension, it's about like building on a foundation of knowledge to begin with. This is why as an adult you're able to understand more complex writing because you will have the previous knowledge to kind of go along with. It's like when I recently just read all the Lord of the Rings, and a lot of the words I didn't know what they meant, but because I had other knowledge, I was able to piece the bits together and kind of like work out the puzzle. But if you struggle with types of language processing, you might not have that prior knowledge to put the pieces together, or you might not be able to locate those pieces of knowledge. Oh, Sarah, though, has done some Googling. Thanks, Sarah. Deep-seated is the correct expression, and the metaphor derives from horseback riding and being deep in the seat in the sense. Oh, nice. Deep-seated refers to the position of the rider of the horse. Thanks, Sarah. The more you know. Anyway, moving sharply on. What does Bob's your uncle mean? Does it mean conclude a set of instructions, refer to nepotism, or everything as well?
Everything's well.
Oh, if only that was the case. Well, they're kind of the same thing, but the answer that we had was conclude a set of instructions. But again, without kind of context or pre knowledge of it, you wouldn't be able to work it out. And just try to put this into a context of someone who really struggles with DLD, when to you and me, it completely makes sense, but to them, without they just aren't able to work it out. And yet I know what Bob's your uncle means, so I would be like, you don't understand that? And you can kind of see. So remember, I'm not saying these particular ones are direct indicators of DLD, but it's more about giving you a sense of empathy of if you struggle with similar types of processing, maybe it's worth investigating. Yeah, Jenny, it's difficult. Never understood why people said that. Okay, what does chew the fat mean? You might notice that I'm getting harder and harder as we go along. So does it mean you're really hungry? Does it mean to gossip? Or does it mean to talk slowly? It is actually to gossip. And that was due to, I think maybe you only ate meat when you were gossiping. I don't know if anyone knows the reason behind that. Do let me know. But that's again a really hard one. So hopefully you're starting to see an idea now of how different languages can be so difficult. Oh, Sarah says the phrase did come from nepotism though. Google British Prime Minister Robert appointed his nephew. Yes, that's correct. As minister. No, you are right there as well. I mean, what's the other one? Oh no. So Sarah, you are totally right, but in day-to-day language, we're referring to conclude a set of instructions. Bob's your uncle. There you go. Easy stuff. But it did originate from nepotism. So, yeah, you are right, but it's not what we normally refer to. If someone's like being nepotistic, you won't say Bob's your uncle. And yeah, I thought slow talking because Grizzly takes longer to eat. Yeah, no, that would be a reasonable junction. Oh, well done, Jenny. And April, a close second in terms of knowing your random English sayings. So conclude on these. Do you find speaking in front of people or giving a presentation, do you find it pretty neutral, not here or there? Do you get quite excited? Or are you an anxious mess? Now, if you put anxious, that is obviously a classic characteristic because you naturally find it harder to process. So, yeah. Not surprising that if you struggle with language, that you would find it very difficult to give a presentation. And this is something which is more obvious in adults because you're more likely to give presentations and you're more likely to have to think in advance. So maybe a well-rehearsed presentation you might be okay at, but if someone was saying firing questions at you at a pitch, very difficult. I've been watching a lot of Dragon's Den recently, and I've seen some people crash and burn just because they're put on the spot despite knowing their product back to back. Okay, what small talk is the worst? Did you order this beautiful weather? Wow, the game last night, eh? Or how did you get into this line of work? Small talk is a classic example where people can really struggle with. And maybe it's because it doesn't make sense. You're like, this isn't relative. Why is this even relative or related? I don't see what this has to do with anything. Like, you've got a window, can't you see the weather? So it's something which people do in a way to lower the boundaries, to make people feel at ease, to kind of start the conversation. But if you struggle with language and processing, you might wonder why it's even applicable. And this obviously very heavily overlaps with autism, and a lot of people with autism can really struggle with this. April says, if I gave a presentation in front of people, I feel more comfortable doing it in front of people I know, but more nervous in front of people I don't. See, that's really interesting, April, where I'm the complete opposite. I would give a presentation in front of people I don't know any day, but people I know, I start worrying. So it's interesting how we're different. Okay, Sarah's loving Google today. Chew the fat. This one is so strange. The pork was a sign of wealth and that a man could really bring home the bacon. They would cut off a little to share with guests and they would sit around and chew the fat. So eventually someone realised that rhyming connection between fat and chat, hence the term. Wow, I'm learning as well. I put excited because this is a heightened emotion, both anxious and just over the top. Yeah, they closely align. I don't understand the question on small talk. I take things very literally. And yeah, that's another one for how you take it. Do you take it at face value? Or do you look at the context and what someone was actually asking? So when you have to join multiple bits of information up in order to understand the question in the way it was intended, that is a key characteristic of DLD. What workplace vocabulary do you often say wrong? So think of things like, oh, I got a PIP report, or I'm on a DLD, or WFH today, or on AL. So these are like abbreviations or like work specific terminology that might be used. So for instance, at exceptional individuals, we use ATW quite a lot, which means access to work, or we might say, "Oh, I'm on AL today," which is annual leave. I'm trying to think of other vocabularies. Like again, we might say, "Okay, yeah, we got someone with ND today," and we're referring to neurodiversity. And these are all phrases which we do actually know, but again, because it's like your brain will kind of have a preference over one way of wording something or understanding it. If it's slightly changed or altered, it can be really difficult. Another good example is I often struggled with do not and don't or is or it isn't. You know, when you kind of shorten words, they mean the exact same thing, but because they were altered in the way that they looked and the way that they sounded, I struggled with kind of cross relating the meanings of them. Curriculum, yeah, that good, because again, your understanding of curriculum might be based on the one you had at school compared to the one you have at work. So now the brain has to like rewrite over its original meaning. And that is another time, like every office is different, so it can be very difficult. I take questions literally and think too much. I often get acronyms, letters in the wrong way. Yeah, always get acronyms in the wrong way, and it can make you feel a little bit dumb sometimes. You're not, but when it's just common language, it's common lingo, everyone's talking about it, and you still struggle with it. If more than one person is talking, can you follow? So, no way. If more than one person's talking, you are not following this conversation. If three people max are talking, you can kind of get the gist, or if there's more than three, not a problem. And this, as you could imagine, if you can't follow more than one, this is a very good sign of DLD. You can see I struggle with that. Every time I say it, I stutter because my brain really struggles to pull those letters. I'm doing a presentation on it, yet I struggle saying three letters because it's different to what I've been learning. But yeah, real classic example. Most people can struggle with three or more, but can do it. And it's because when the words are overlapping each other, when people are talking, are you able to pull them apart? Or do they kind of like blur into like one mess? And it can lead to a very similar process. So when if anyone ever says you in a meeting, stop talking over each other, you're doing it for everyone. You know, it really does benefit everyone. What is a term where you misinterpreted a friendly conversation as rude or confusing? So we often did these idioms and expressions, right, where we didn't know what they meant, so we couldn't answer. But what happened if you thought it meant something else that it didn't? Like, did it mean Bob's your uncle? Did it mean nepotism? Or did it mean, like, easy stuff? If you had the wrong understanding of that, the way you react to someone can be quite different, and you could come across quite standoffish. And unfortunately, a lot of people with autism or communication conditions can come off quite rude because the way they deliver their response isn't the response that other people were expecting. So it's just miscommunication. But unfortunately, if no one is able to sit down and explain why you got to that answer, difficulties. Are you having a party? When I had a lot of snacks and food in my shopping trolley. Yeah, I could see that being like a misunderstanding. I always get misunderstood when she says, "Oh, you know, puts me on hold on the phone." I always assume they've left, so I hang up, even though they were expecting me to hold on.
Sorry, I was going to say this is more autism because it's the way you ask someone the question, and if you say it in the wrong way, some people say, "Oh, you don't say it in that way."
Yeah, no, you're right. It has so many assumptions. You assume that you both understand the tonal direction. It assumes you both understand what all the words mean, and it assumes that you'll both, you know, feel the similar type of emotions at the time. There's a lot of assumptions to what goes into understanding something. Yeah, end of phone calls are weird. I never know when the right time to hang up is. When you receive a text, this is what I'm a big fan of emojis, and you probably noticed by now I love a good GIF because for me they really help understand the emotion and the intent. Text messages, the amount of times I've been angry at an email because I thought someone's been rude to me when actually it's not the case. And classic example. Yes, memes, Jenny, I love them. I love a good meme. It's not your day, is it, when I dropped some things I was going to post in the post office? Yeah, like what does that mean? And your response might be like, and the other person's like, I was just being friendly, and already you're kind of not matching up very well. So I think this is the last one. Do you have trouble answering a direct question from your colleagues, even if you know the answer? The next one. Do you struggle to keep up with any social small talk? And are you unable to master the vocabulary of your workplace? So this is summarizing the last 3 questions, but if you kind of struggle with a lot of these, that's a very classic characteristic. Okay, interesting. Yeah, I'd say that's quite average. Remember, we all struggle with things from time to time, but when we diagnose things, we're typically looking for, does this affect you in a way that interferes with day-to-day activities, and has it affected you for like 12 months or more? So we're looking for more than just yes or no. So never go away from today thinking, that says if this happens, I've got this. It's more about, does it actually have an impact on your life? Is it something which is hindering your experience of the human condition? And is this something which is going to be prolonged and isn't just because you're stressed at that moment or time? So the takeaways is DLD isn't a lack of exposure to language. This is one of the most common misconceptions, that people assume maybe you've learnt too many languages and the brain couldn't take it. Maybe that you weren't taught to enough as a child. No, it's not something you kind of like develop. You're kind of born with it, and it's with the development. It can be a hidden difficulty, so it's not obvious at first, and this is why it takes time to like show its true colours and to notice if it's going to be something which will impact your life. Now, just to summarise, all you do is go on our website and we do all the paperwork on your behalf, so you do not have to worry about going via the government. You can absolutely go to the government or go via a different method if you're in the workplace. It's just we might be able to do a more tailored approach. So it's good to know. And last of all, any questions? Any questions for myself? Any questions for Rachel? Any questions for anyone else? Do let us know, because I appreciate this is a subject which is probably quite new to a lot of us.
There's an organisation called Engage with DLD, EDLD, which I'd recommend you all have a look at, because it's specifically to spread information about DLD.
Is that a website? Is that a
yeah? So if you just go, it's called Engage with DLD or E-DLD, and just go. It's a website, and there's also this other one called Raddled.
Engage DLD.
DLD, yeah. So for developmental language disorder. And Raddled is really great because it's got loads of YouTube videos on it that you can watch of people talking about DLD. That's really, really useful. But
so it's called Dazzle. RADLD. It stands for Raising Awareness of DLD. If you Google that, it'll come up,
yeah, it definitely will come straight up.
Well, Dory, Fozana, we can always send it to you if you're finding difficulty in finding it. But the second one is what I used a lot for research today. So that one I can definitely say I've been to. Well, let's finish up there because that's quite a lot. But I want to say a massive thank you to obviously April for recording today, and also to Rachel. So you came here to learn, and you've actually been teaching, and I've learned a lot. So
thank you so much. Thanks so much for having me, and I really learned a lot from listening to you as well. And great to hear that you're all meeting up. And really, if there's anything that I can do to help, then just get in touch with me.
No, definitely. I mean, if it's something that you do as a freelancer, feel free to drop us an email and we can always have talks. We're always building up our database of people who can assess and support for conditions which are less common. Sure. And I'll be honest with you, this is a subject which we aren't specialists in yet, but as you can tell, we are on our way of learning. So it would always be great to have someone to bounce off of.
Sure. Should I email you or?
Yes, I'll put the details up in a moment.
Right.
But just quickly to round up on, guys, if you want to watch any of our previous webinars, just go on our YouTube channel, which are lovely edited by April. Here are the details. So my name's Nat, and if you want to email me, it's just nat@accept.co.uk. Or if you just want to get in touch with us generally, just to ask about support, just either go to our website, drop us a call. We're a service which is 100% free to individuals. You never have to pay. It's only for companies. So it's nice and accessible for hopefully all of you. And wow, that was a lot of presentation. I've learned a lot myself, and I hope you did too. And yeah, join you at the next one. Thank you everyone for attending. It has been really, really interesting.